CNC machining is great, but it has a high fixed cost. And I do tend to break more tooling and parts with it than I care to admit. And the frequency of these stepper motors hum at makes me hear voices sometimes. And on top of all that, CNC machining isn't all that great. So, when I was approached by my innermost thoughts and feelings on a rainy spring afternoon, I took apart my CNC router cabinet. I'd built the cabinet years prior, before I had any real carpentry experience, tools, or apparently, self-respect. Nonetheless, for many years, while I cavorted around the country in the back of a pickup truck, and then a travel trailer, and finally a cargo van, I let this router decay away in my father's garage, motionless and unappreciated. When I finally returned from my long travels, I swept up my beloved, drove her 1,000 miles away, and carried her across the threshold, never to be seen again. In all of this, I should have built a new cabinet for her, but my hubris, and continued lack of self-respect, prompted me to apply band-aid fixes and half-baked pursuits of rigidity in a good-enough-for-now style of approach. Eventually, though, this giant white eyesore dividing the middle of the room began to weigh on me, and, in a fit of impulsivity, I tore down the old to make room for the new. Not a new router cabinet, still lacking the self-respect to tackle that particular character fault, but to move my lathe and milling machine to occupy the space that the router previously did. In so doing, it quickly became clear, as it often does, that the true reason I destroyed this embarrassing homage to my past wasn't to get better camera angles, or a more comfortable work environment, or a mounting surface for the mill that wasn't a plywood bass drum, but rather the true reason was to build a lamp. This light strip you see before you is what used to light the interior of the router cabinet. Before that, these lights lit the cargo compartment of my van, which, before becoming a painting booth, served as a big open space in which I constructed my previous domicile, which I lit with some very practical RGB LED strips as a more modern semaphore flag than the old "when the van's a rockin', don't come a knockin'." Look, just stay away when the lights are red, okay? I like to read in peace when I'm on the toilet. The best part about vehicle electronics like this is that they're all built to accept a nominal 12-volt DC power input. 12 volts is a very common supply voltage, so powering this type of salvage becomes a trivial task by simply determining the polarity of the lights and adding a quasi-standard barrel jack somewhere in the circuit. But, as you saw, I already added a barrel jack back when I built this strip to live in the aforementioned router cabinet, so I guess we can all go home for the day? No, I'm just pulling your leg. We like to keep it light here at Pearly Brook, but we also don't believe in days off. You're here till your heart stops beating, friend. Instead, we will make something wondrous, magnanimous, spectacular, and maybe, just maybe, somewhere along the way we'll even make a few friends. Today we banish an existence relegated to staring at shadows on the walls and venture forth from the cave into the burning light beyond for the good of all, and maybe, just maybe, even for a few friends. The journey is arduous and fraught with peril, but with Plato guiding our hand we cannot falter. The switch you just saw me soldering wires onto goes inside this piece of brass C-channel, which is attached to the steel L-beam running across the... You know what, you'll see it in the end. Just trust the process until then. It If you value carpentry hammers, you may want to look away during this next section. Viewer discretion is advised. Legalese aside, take care to not be too critical of my peening methods here. It's the first time I've ever peened, and I didn't yet own a peening hammer, so I'm feeling a little vulnerable. Having enjoyed the experience, though, I do own a peening hammer now, so stay tuned for more hot peening action. What I'm peening here is some steel sheet metal to the open sides of some brass C-channel to complete a 5-sided metal box. I left the steel sheet a little oversized, so I didn't need to worry too much about sizing it to the C-channel, which, if you've ever worked with, you already know is often far from square. To rectify the mismatch, I make quick work of the excess steel with some filing. This box takes the power from the 12-volt inverter through this hole on top, passes one lead through a switch, which comes out another hole in the side, and then routes power down to the light strip. It may look like I'm trying to rectify a mistake here, and that's because I am. I can't reveal what mistake yet, without getting into spoilers, but we'll get to that when we start laying some pipe. Wait, is this too many sexual innuendos for one video? Since we're making a lamp, we'll need a lampshade. For the structural part of the lampshade, I decided to use up a bunch of this brass bar stock I have laying around from a purchase of miscellaneous offcuts I made a while ago. I went back and forth on how to manufacture all of these. There's 6 pieces, and each needs 8 precisely drilled holes to match their mating parts. I tried stacking them all on top of each other and drilling once for each hole, but I couldn't get a setup that I felt comfortable with, valuing my intact skin more than efficiency in manufacturing. Ultimately, I settled on a stop block on the mill where I could slot in each piece on its own in a replicatable setup, so I at least wouldn't need to locate each part individually. Though that still left me with 48 individual holes that needed to be drilled with a moderate level of precision. As I undertake such repetitive tasks, my stricken mind begins to wander, and I begin to question the wisdom of following Plato's allegory of the cave rather than buying a lamp at the local hardware store. For there is not enough amphetamine in the world to keep my mind on task during such trying times, and I falter. Finding my will insufficient to keep my thoughts aligned, my focus wanes. But there is hope, for where my own strength falters, I find strength in the mantra of our ancestors. Putting faith in the machines that we may be blessed to grow, our flock thriving. And so we repeat, ad infinitum. 1 5.4 inch by 1/4 inch, mark, drill, amen. 1 5.4 inch by 3/4 inch, mark, drill, amen. 1 4.6 inch by 3/4 inch, mark, drill, amen. 1 4.6 inch by 1/4 inch, mark, drill, amen. 1 3 inch by 1/2 inch, mark, drill, amen. 1 2 inch by 1/2 inch, mark, drill, amen. 1/2 inch by 3/4 inch, mark, drill, amen. 1/2 inch by 1/4 inch, mark, drill, amen. So do we anoint this brass in the name of science. May its soul be blessed, for forevermore will this brass be saved, safe in the arms of the church, as we repeat our mantra, ad infinitum. 1 5.4 inch by 1/4 inch, mark, drill, amen. When I started this project, I didn't have a real plan for how I was going to hang the thing from the ceiling, trusting instead that the allegory would provide. The allegory did not, and so instead, I laid some pipe. Okay, that's definitely too many innuendos. That's the same damn joke. This particular pipe is more of the same water heater piping I used to electroplate the statue of Atlas in the ring tube video, which you have seen, right? I've only realized that I can solder metal together outside of wires and circuit boards in the last 2 years or so, and boy has that bit of knowledge gotten some mileage. There's something gutturally satisfying about joining two pieces of metal together with flame as solid metal liquefies and flows into the gaps without any active guiding influence. Relying instead on careful surface preparation and proper heat control, like all things should. It's finally time for your pop quiz, so I hope you are paying attention. And by that I mean I'm finally revealing my foreshadowed shameful mistake. If you've made enough mistakes in life, you probably already know that numerous repeated mistakes are the best way to learn the skill of rationalizing away our shame, keeping our fragile egos intact and our self-esteem clinically low. In this case, I realized that I had no way to align and hold the lamp portion square to the pipe portion. This little mistake cover allows for aligning the copper pipe and for holding that alignment once secured to the top of the control box. It also serves to cover this mangled abomination of a hole, but through the power of rationalization we don't need to dwell on that, trusting instead that this hole looks exactly as was intended all along, and that this cover plate was always planned since it is necessary to keep the lamp square. Speaking of mistakes, sorry to leave you on a cliffhanger, but I apparently lost, or never recorded, the footage of me drilling any of the holes in this cover plate. And if you're disappointed by that, you're going to be real disappointed when you realize the footage that you just watched wasn't even of the cover plate I'm talking about, and yet that part also doesn't have hole drilling footage. The lamp weighs just enough that I'm not comfortable mounting it in sheetrock alone, and when I built the workbench the lamp sits over top of, I failed to center it under a rafter. Poor planning on my part, I suppose. That means we need something that can span the rafters in my ceiling to mount this lamp to. A simple 1-inch thick piece of pine will do, cut to a length of roughly 26 inches to span the 24-inch on center rafters I have, plus some extra for this delicious Roman OG. OG? More like oh my. The lamp hangs from this using a conduit nut and a 1/2-inch threaded pipe fitting soldered onto the end of the copper pipe. There's a small channel grooved into the back of the stud spanner where the output power lines from the inverter get directed, safely hidden away as they make their journey down the copper pipe and into the lights themselves, where the blinding light of the sun is converted into something a little more appropriate for the dank of this cave. Since these lights run on 12-volt DC, we need an inverter somewhere in the circuit. And since I don't know of any inverters that don't come in disgusting black plastic boxes, we need some makeup. By that I mean we need a wooden box, properly stained and shellacked, like all dignified inverter boxes should be. To help with this, I broke out my ancient miter saw. Well, miter saw guiding apparatus. I still need to buy an appropriately sized back saw for it, since my current wood saw is woefully undersized and horribly misshapen for this task. In fact, I think this miter saw apparatus may have done more harm than good in this instance, but I got excited to use it, and I'm not one to pass up childhood whimsy whenever it involves sawing. This small opening on one side is where the input power cord slots through. I'm not one to use a whole lot of wood glue, but the ease with which this little box came together may have been enough to change my stance. though I still need to submit the proposal for approval and will get back to you in 6 to 7 to 18 months. The power output will pass out the open underside of this box through a hole in the stud spanning plate. The inverter cover box fits to the stud spanner using 4 inset nuts because I don't trust the longevity of anything and I want a way to somewhat easily replace this inverter should it die on me. My original plan for the lampshade was to cut up a piece of painter's cloth. While searching my closet for the smallest appropriate piece of painter's cloth, though, I became weary with hunger and set out to eat some rice and lentils, food fit for the gods. When I purchase anything these days, I typically view the packaging as part of the product, as much as feasible anyway. If you want to join me in this packaging revolution, all you need to remember is package product. PP for short. Alright, that's it. Who wrote this script? It's absolute swill. I'll have your resignation on my desk by morning or there'll be hell to pay. In this case, the choice between this 20-pound bag of basmati rice and any other rice option was obvious. And the burlap sack it was packaged in was a nice bonus too. I wasn't quite sure what I planned to do with this rice sack when I bought it, but placing my faith in the allegory, buy it I did. I know now that the allegory had a plan all along. This rice sack, forged in hellfire at the foot of Mount Everest, according to the packaging anyway, was destined to become a lampshade, fit to adorn the space above my lathe for all time henceforth. To attach the shade to the structural portions, I used some carpet tape I had laying around from the days when I used it to hold parts down during CNC machining. Delightfully circumstantial. I cut the sack to final size in situ, hoping that the coarse weave wouldn't come unraveled any further simply because the threads are stuck to the surface of the lamp. I'd have hemmed the seams if only I could find my sewing kit, but it's probably better that I didn't on account of my stitch being so horrifying I would need to age restrict this video for sensible viewing everywhere. To complete the billiards lamp style, wait, have I mentioned that this is supposed to resemble a billiards lamp yet? Well, too late now. We need some triangular end caps. I grooved a slot for the L-beam to rest in so the wood and the L-beam have matching surface levels. One of the brass lampshade pieces then rests on top of all of this, and screws are passed into both the wood and the L-beam, joining the two in holy matrimony for all eternity, on account of the Loctite I used. The pipe hanger slots through a hole drilled into each of these end caps, thereby supporting the lamp by slotting the pipe through the lamp's sides. You may also notice that the end caps suddenly got a whole lot smaller. Don't ask too many questions because I don't have too many answers. I don't have any fancy conclusion to this video like I normally do, where I assemble all the components into their final form and spout some inane pseudo-poetic nonsense. If you were paying close attention, you should have expected this though, since I clandestinely worked in the assembly into the rest of the video like a thief in the night. If you're disappointed, may you find solace in these shots of the lathe on prime display under its new lighting. This new setup will allow me to get better camera angles more easily, not having to contend with an overbearing wall situated too close to the rear of the lathe constantly. Hopefully, this means that, in time, my wall and I can move on from our fractious past, we both said things we regret, and someday become friends again. So I guess we really did find a friend along the way. And you know what? If you ever happen to be around these parts, on some long haul through a dark, stormy night, with your heart heavy and your resolve waning, look to the horizon. That little twinkle you see on the underside of those clouds, that's us here at Pearlybrook. We're sending your signal. You're almost home. Because here at Pearlybrook, we'll leave the light on for you. Well, no, actually, we won't. Budget cuts and all. Just come home a little earlier next time. What's that? I'm the only one that works here? We make how much money? Wait, why do we have "and company" at the end of our name then? Oh, all right. I'll have it on your desk by morning.